Human history is about the struggles, clashes between forces of good and evil. See, from the ancient tales of Greek mythology, like the Trojan horse or Ulysses, to fairy tales and children's books, like St. George and the Dragon and Jack and the Beanstalk, these stories about the fight between good and evil have been repackaged and served to us thousands and thousands of times, all the way down to today's books, movies, and video games depicting the epic battles between superheroes and mighty villains. But do these endless battles between good and evil have any bearing on our lives? Well, all of us are affected by evil in one way or another, and let me define evil. Evil is more than just a shadowy figure hiding in an alleyway somewhere. It's also things like the evils of nature that the first settlers had to deal with, like soil, hard soil, starvation, the heat. Tornadoes are an evil. Earthquakes are also an evil. So evil is anything that results in pain, sorrow, or distress. Many of us experience pain in the form of poor health, accidents, and natural disasters. We've experienced sorrow due to disappointments and injustices and losing a loved one in death. We've felt distress from something even as simple as hurtful speech and actions from others. But when we experience some form of evil, one human tendency is to become resentful and to blame others, or even to attribute such evils to God. Let me explain that, or give you an example. When we lose someone in death, we may have heard someone say something like, God wanted another angel in heaven, or it was their time to go, or something like, God does everything for a reason. But what are they really saying when they say that? See, thoughts like this imply that God does not attach much importance to the feelings and emotions that we have for our loved ones, but instead he's selfishly ripping humans away from us with a complete disregard of the effects that it may cause. What an awful picture that paints of God. That doesn't sound anything like the loving creator depicted in the Bible, does it? Sounds more like God is employing evil methods for his personal gain, doesn't it? Let's see what James 1:13 says about this. When we're reading this, I want you to remember what we explained as evil. It's something that causes sorrow, distress, and pain. James 1:13 says, when under trial, let no one say, I am being tried by God. For with evil things God cannot be tried, nor does he himself try anyone. See, with that understanding of what happens to the dead, we're able to move past our grief and focus on the future hope of seeing our dead loved ones again in the future. Certainly we can see that God is not responsible for evils like this, can't we? See, many who feel that someone is at fault, though, they may not feel that God himself is at fault. They may feel that somebody else is at fault, and they want to seek vengeance. They want to retaliate. But this also makes matters worse. Let's consider what happened with Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi. See, they took vengeance on their sister, or they took vengeance on Shechem, who defiled their sister. And at Genesis 34:7, it says that they became hurt in their feelings and they grew very angry. And let's read how they took this vengeance at Genesis 34:25. Now, Shechem had taken Dinah and defiled her, as I mentioned. And when Dinah's brothers found out about this, this is what they devised. This is Genesis 34:25. It says, however, it came about that on the third day, when they got to be aching, the two sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, brothers of Dinah, proceeded to take each one his sword and to go unsuspectedly to the city and to kill every male. Did this act of retaliation heal their emotional wounds, though? No, it did not. See, if you read on, the account goes on to show that their uncontrolled anger and their desire to retaliate not only brought disfavor from both Jehovah God, but also their father Jacob. and it put their entire family's life at risk. So is there anything that we can do when we're faced with evil circumstances? Are we completely defenseless against evil's relentless attacks? Well, the Bible answers this for us. Let's find that answer at Romans 12:21. Romans 12:21 says, "Do not let yourself be conquered by the evil, but keep conquering the evil with the good." It was going to happen. I knew it was. So like any great general, before devising an attack strategy, we must first study our opponent. And to do this, we have to start back at the beginning, where evil originated. See, after creating the first human pair, God saw everything that he had made, and look, it was very good, says Genesis 1:31. Everything was designed to be eternally good. In the Garden of Eden, where God placed the first human pair, he also placed the tree of knowledge, and then he placed a law forbidding the eating of the fruit of that tree of knowledge of good and bad. This was to remind Adam and Eve of his right as the grand creator to determine the proper standard of conduct. See, if they were obedient, then no harm would ever come to them or their offspring. But Adam and Eve allowed themselves to be deceived and disobey Jehovah. So, the result was that their descendants, the entire human race, you and I, are left with a legacy of sin and death. Now, of course, we're not saying that Satan is directly responsible for every incident of evil that befalls mankind. Ecclesiastes 9:11 points this out very clearly. Let's read that. It's Ecclesiastes 9, verse 11. It says, "I return to see under the sun that the swift do not have the race, nor the mighty ones the battle, nor do the wise also have the food, nor do the understanding ones also have the riches, nor do even those having knowledge have the favor, because time and unforeseen occurrence befall them all." You see, time and unforeseen occurrence, imperfection, and poor judgment can also bring evil results. But there's another reason that we experience evil. And although he may not be directly involved in every evil that we may be forced to endure, Satan's influence is one of the reasons why wickedness prevails today as never before. And what do I mean? Let's see at 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 3. 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 through 3 says, "But know this, that in the last days critical times, hard to deal with, will be here. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, self-assuming, haughty, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, disloyal, having no natural affection, not open to any agreement, slanderers without self-control, fierce, without love of goodness." Don't we see all these things around us in the world today, proving that we're living in the last days? Soon God will intervene and destroy all forms of wickedness and evil, and only then will humans truly be able to fully enjoy life as God originally purposed. And just a little while longer, says Psalms 37:11 and 10 and 11, "And the wicked one will be no more, and you will certainly give attention to his place, and he will not be. But the meek ones themselves will possess the earth, and they will indeed find their exquisite delight in the abundance of peace." And John at Revelation 21:3 and 4 writes, "With that I heard a loud voice from the throne say, 'Look, the tent of God is with mankind, and he will reside with them. And they will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. And he will wipe out every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more. Neither will mourning, nor outcry, nor pain be any more. The former things have passed away.'" What a beautiful time we can look forward to, wouldn't you say? But until then, let's talk about how we can cope with and conquer the evil, pain, and sorrow of this world with good. Evil things such as crime or accidents can often be anticipated and avoided, at the very least be made less serious by simple forethought. Wouldn't you agree? The Bible brings this point out at Proverbs. Let's read that. It's Proverbs 22 and verse 3. Proverbs 22:3. Shrewd is the one that has seen the calamity and proceeds to conceal himself, but the inexperienced have passed along and must suffer the penalty. But often there's nothing we can do to avoid evil or the effects of evil. Humans and animals alike have this inborn response mechanism that goes off when they're put into danger. They have two choices, fight or flight. Well, as we can see, we can't flee from the clutches of evil, so we have to fight against them. But how? Well, we must conquer it with the good. But what does that mean? I keep saying that, to conquer evil with the good. Well, first, let's not mistakenly take the term to conquer the evil with the good to mean to passively endure mistreatment, nor does it mean to retaliate in kind. See, goodness is a positive quality. It expresses itself in many beneficial ways. In fact, when called good teacher, Jesus immediately exclaimed at Mark 10, verse 18, "Nobody is good except God." Goodness, or the quality of being good, is a powerful and beneficial quality to possess. Remember the power of Jehovah's goodness when he caused all his goodness to pass before Moses' face? See, after which, upon returning down from that trip up the mountain, the people were scared because of the radiance and illumination that was saturating Moses' skin after that. But also notice one other key point found in that account. This helps define goodness. Let's turn there to Exodus 34. Six and 7. It's Exodus 34, 6 and 7. And Jehovah went passing up before his face and declaring, "Jehovah, Jehovah, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abundant in loving kindness and truth, preserving loving kindness for thousands, pardoning error and transgression and sin, but by no means will he give exemption from punishment." Did you notice that Jehovah's goodness was not a sign of weakness? The Bible reveals that many ways that we can conquer evil with good, and I'm sure we've seen or heard of some modern-day experiences as well. But today we only have time to examine 3 specific situations in which we can conquer evil with this very desirable quality of goodness. 2 Timothy 3:12 says that all those desiring to live with godly devotion and association with Christ Jesus will be persecuted. So by being Christ's true followers, we can expect to deal with persecution in one form or another. But we can conquer all forms of persecution by refusing to compromise our faith and by enduring with joy for the sake of the good news. Yes, friends, I said to endure persecution with joy. Why did I say that? What does that mean? Well, let's look to the apostles for their fine example. Let's read Acts chapter 5. Acts 5:27. So they brought them and stood them in the Sanhedrin hall, and the high priest questioned them and said, "We positively ordered you not to keep teaching upon the basis of this name, and yet look, you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching, and you are determined to bring the blood of this man upon us." In answer, Peter and the other apostles said, "We must obey God as ruler rather than man." Let's drop down and read verses 40. At this, they gave heed to him, and they summoned the apostles, flogged them, and ordered them to stop speaking upon the basis of Jesus' name and let them go. These therefore went their way from before the Sanhedrin, rejoicing, because they had been counted worthy to be dishonored in behalf of his name. Also, another benefit that may come from conquering persecution with good is that we may even soften our persecutors. This wisdom can be found at Romans chapter 12. Romans 12, starting in verse 17, it says, "Return evil for evil to no one. Provide fine things in the sight of all men. If possible, as far as it depends upon you, be peaceable with all men. Do not avenge yourselves, beloved, but yield place to the wrath. For it is written, 'Vengeance is mine, I will repay,' says Jehovah. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap fiery coals upon his head. What does that mean, to heap fiery coals on his head? Well, see, in ancient times, when they would smelt iron, they would lay it upon a bed of fiery coals to soften the metal and bring out the best quality of iron they could. But see, laying it on this bed of iron wouldn't get the iron hot enough. They would have to heap fiery, burning hot coals on top of the metal in order to get it hot enough. So by returning kindness to evil, we may have the same effect on those persecuting us and actually soften them, bringing out the good in them. I want to share a modern-day example of this. It says, in one village, there is one of Jehovah's Witnesses who was constantly harassed by the village priest. This priest threatened the witness with imprisonment because of his Christian work, but the witness always replied with kindness befitting a Christian. The priest was determined to put this witness behind bars. He found some who were willing to testify falsely against him, and they did so. The judge found the witness guilty and sentenced him to 2 months in prison. When the 2 months were over, the witness was released, and he returned to his village and resumed his previous activities. One day, as the witness was walking along, he saw the priest sprawled out on the street, bleeding profusely and nearly dying from the injury he had suffered from a fall. The witness rushed to the priest's aid, and when the priest recognized him, he cried out, "You, of all people, can anyone else be found?" The witness told him that he was in great need of medical attention and that they had to go quickly to a doctor. So the witness kindly took the injured priest to the nearest clinic and paid for 7 days' hospitalization for him. When the priest recovered and was released from the clinic, he returned to the village and resumed his duties there. Late one evening, the priest visited the witness, who hospitably welcomed him into his home. The priest was remorseful for what he had done and asked the witness to forgive him for his deplorable conduct. He said, "The devil put me up to this." The priest continued, "Go. Do your work freely, and if anyone interferes with you, tell him he has to deal with me." And this is just one of many examples of how acting with goodness in the face of an evil situation can result in a positive way. The second form of evil we're going to discuss is losing a loved one in death. Now, this can bring out strong, confusing emotions, and grieving is a normal and natural way to process those emotions. Now, we all know the account of Lazarus. He was a close friend of Jesus, and while Jesus was away, Lazarus had died. Even with the knowledge and the power Jesus had to resurrect Lazarus, Jesus still gave way to tears. He grieved for his friend. However, prolonged grief can be damaging and can lead to serious depression along with many other negative effects. But as true Christians, we mustn't grieve unconsolingly. The Bible clearly says that the dead are not being harmed, or are they harming others, but they're merely asleep in death and waiting for Jehovah's call for all those in the memorial tombs to a future resurrection of life on earth. Continue putting up with one another. No, there we are. I mean, that's a good thing too, but see, this knowledge, along with applying scriptural advice and relying on the love and concern from our brothers, can help us to gradually conquer overwhelming negative emotions. Following the death of every one of his children in one day, Job realized that he was overwhelmed with grief and found that talking about his loss would help to move on. Let's read this account at Job chapter 10 and verse 1. Job 10:1 says, "My soul certainly feels a loathing towards my life. I will give vent to my concern about myself. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul." Shakespeare said something similar to in his famous play Macbeth. "Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak whispers to the overfraught heart and bids it break." We can also use our personal experience of losing someone in death to help others find solace. We can demonstrate our absolute confidence and complete trust in Jehovah's promise for the future, building up the faith of others who may be grieving along with our own. The third form of evil that we may experience is simply that of being a target of offensive speech and actions. See, thoughtless words and actions of others can hurt. Proverbs 12:18 poetically describes the pain and hurt speech can cause. Let's read that. That's Proverbs 12, verse 18. It says, "There exists the one speaking thoughtlessly, as with now here's the key, the stabs of a sword, but the tongue of the wise ones is a healing." So when someone does or says something uncaring or thoughtless to us, it may feel like a stab from a sword. So how should we respond? Well, we may try to avoid any contact with that individual again. But is that really the right course, especially if it's our brother that may have done this to us? Well, 1 John 4:20 tells us that acceptance of our worship depends partly on our loving our brother. So how do we conquer this evil act, whether it's intentional or accidental, with good? The answer is found in a familiar scripture to us at Colossians 3. Let's turn there and read that. It's Colossians 3:13. Colossians 3:13 says, "Continue putting up with one another and forgiving one another freely. If anyone has a cause for complaint against another, even as Jehovah freely forgave you, so do you also." But what if the offender does it multiple times, over and over again? Well, Peter actually wondered the same thing when he asked Jesus at Matthew 18:21, "Lord, how many times is my brother to sin against me and I am to forgive him? Up to 7 times?" Well, Jesus answered him in verse 22 by saying, "Not up to 7 times, but up to 77 times." See, by telling Peter to forgive up to 77 times, so to speak, Jesus was really saying that we should not even try to keep account of the injury. But always be ready to forgive our brothers. We can conquer bad feelings towards others by forgiving them outright and by settling differences quickly and in the spirit of love. "Be wrathful, and yet do not sin," says Ephesians 4:26. And 32 says, "But become kind to one another, tenderly compassionate, freely forgiving one another, just as God also by Christ freely forgave you." So we should always keep in mind that we too are imperfect and will likely offend others with our speech or actions. So let's concentrate, brothers, on making positive changes to our own personalities as well. Now, we started out by being reminded that human history is all about a violent struggle, clashes between forces of good and evil. The day will come, brothers and sisters, when our culture will not be molded by bloody legends and gruesome fairy tales. It will no longer be considered normal for good and evil to fight on and on without resolution. Peter encourages us to prepare ourselves for a life in a world when evil will be conquered once and for all. Let's close with those verses. It's found at 1 Peter chapter 3. We'll read verses 10 and 11. "For he that would love life and see good days, let him restrain his tongue from what is bad and his lips from speaking deception. But let him turn away from what is bad and do what is good. Let him seek peace and pursue it."
Thank you very much, Brother Wright. We really enjoyed that discussion. We appreciate the preparation delivery of that.